The fluorescent lights of the H&M buzzed faintly, but they couldn't drown out the pounding in my chest. I stood in the fitting room, clutching a denim jacket I didn't even like, wondering why I'd come here at all. Then he walked in, Eli, the employee with eyes like a storm and a smile that felt like a secret meant just for me. My name's Lucas, 22. A college dropout still figuring out who I'm supposed to be. That day, I wandered into the H&M on Fifth Avenue, New York City. Not because I needed clothes, but because I needed somewhere to hide. Life had been a blur since I left school, family pressure, a string of dead-end jobs, and a nagging feeling I was running from something I couldn't name. The store was a chaos of color and noise. Shoppers weaving through racks. Pop music pulsing through the speakers. I grabbed the jacket off a sale rack, more to have an excuse to linger than anything else, and headed to the fitting rooms. Eli was there, folding shirts with a precision that seemed almost meditative. His name tag glinted under the lights, and his dark hair fell just enough to make you want to brush it aside. "Need a room?" he asked, voice low, like he was sharing a confidence. I nodded, suddenly aware of how my hands shook as I handed him the jacket to scan. He led me to a fitting room at the end of the hall, his steps unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. Inside, the mirror showed a version of me I barely recognized, pale, tired, eyes darting like I was waiting for something to go wrong. I slipped on the jacket, but it felt wrong. Too stiff. Too much like someone else's skin. That's when I heard the click. The door locked behind me. I turned, heart racing, to see Eli standing there, one hand still on the knob, his expression unreadable. "I noticed you," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You've been coming in here for weeks. Always picking something random. Never buying." My mouth went dry. Had I been that obvious? I thought I'd blended into the crowd. Just another face in the city. "What's your deal, Lucas?" he asked, stepping closer, the space between us shrinking to nothing. I froze. No one had ever called me out like that. Seen through the act I'd been perfecting for years. Growing up in a small town upstate, I'd learned to keep my head down, to hide the parts of me that didn't fit the mold my parents expected: good grades, good job, good girlfriend. But I wasn't good at any of it. And the truth, I'd known since I was 16 that I didn't want a girlfriend. I wanted something else. Someone like Eli. Maybe. Though I'd never let myself think it that clearly until now. "I don't know," I managed, my voice cracking. I don't know what I'm doing." It was the most honest thing I'd said in months. Eli's eyes softened, but there was something else there, too, a spark of defiance, like he was daring me to say more. He reached out, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his hand hovering near mine. "You don't have to know," he said, "but you don't have to hide either." The air felt electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. I wanted to tell him everything: how I'd spent years dodging questions about my love life, how I'd moved to the city to escape but still felt trapped, how his presence made me feel like I was standing on the edge of something terrifying and beautiful. But before I could speak, there was a sharp knock on the door. "Eli, you in there?" a voice called, gruff and impatient. His manager. Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "Give me a sec," he called back, his eyes never leaving mine. "Stay?" he whispered to me, so quiet I almost missed it. Then he unlocked the door and slipped out, leaving me alone with the mirror and the weight of what had just happened. I stood there, heart hammering, the jacket still hanging off my shoulders. What had he meant? Stay? Stay in the fitting room. Stay in this moment. Stay with him. My mind raced, replaying every word, every glance. I didn't know Eli. Not really. But in those few minutes, he'd seen me in a way no one else ever had. And that scared me as much as it thrilled me. I didn't leave the fitting room right away. I couldn't. Something had shifted, like a door had been cracked open, letting in light I'd been avoiding my whole life. When I finally stepped out, Eli was back at the folding table, but his eyes found mine across the room. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just held my gaze like he was waiting for me to make the next move. I didn't know what that move was. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find out. The H&M was busier now. The late afternoon crowd filling the store with chatter and the rustle of shopping bags. I lingered near a rack of sweaters, pretending to browse. But my eyes kept drifting to Eli. He was helping a customer now. His smile polite but distant. Nothing like the one he'd given me in the fitting room. My hands still tingled from the memory of his near touch. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at a crossroads. One wrong step away from losing something I hadn't even known I wanted. I should have left. I should have walked out into the New York chaos and let the city swallow me whole. But my feet stayed rooted. And when Eli glanced my way again, I knew I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. I wandered to another rack, picking up a scarf I had no intention of buying, just to have something to do with my hands. That's when I heard his voice again, closer this time. "You're still here," Eli said. Not a question, but a statement, like he'd known I wouldn't leave. I turned, the scarf slipping from my fingers. "Yeah," I said, lamely. Didn't find what I was looking for. It was a lie, and we both knew it. Eli's lips quirked. Not quite a smile, but enough to make my stomach flip. "Maybe you're looking in the wrong place," he said, his voice low, like he was testing me. Before I could respond, he gestured toward the back of the store. "Come with me. I'm on break." I followed him, heart pounding, through a maze of clothes and customers to a small employee break room tucked behind the stock area. It was cramped, with a wobbly table, a vending machine, and a bulletin board covered in schedules and faded flyers. Eli shut the door, and the noise of the store faded to a dull hum. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair. I did, feeling like I was in some kind of dream where nothing made sense, but everything felt right. "Why'd you lock the door earlier?" I blurted out, unable to hold it in any longer. Eli leaned against the table, arms crossed, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Because I wanted to talk to you," he said simply, and I didn't want anyone interrupting. His honesty caught me off guard, and I felt my face heat up. "Talk about what?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook, flipping it open to a page filled with sketches, faces, hands, cityscapes, all drawn with a kind of raw intensity that made my chest ache. "I see people," he said, not looking at me. "All day, every day, in this store. Most of them are just noise. But you're different. You walk in here like you're carrying the weight of the world. And I wanted to know why." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever described me like that. Like I was worth noticing. "I'm not. I'm just me. Nothing special." Eli's eyes snapped to mine, fierce and unyielding. "Don't say that," he said, his voice sharp. "You don't get to decide what's special about you. Not to me." The air in the room felt too small, too warm. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Eli closed the notebook and slid it toward me. "Draw something," he said. "Anything. Just show me who you are." I laughed, nervous, but he didn't budge. So I picked up the pencil he offered, my hand shaking, and sketched the first thing that came to mind: a tree, gnarled and bare, like the ones back home that stood alone in the winter fields. It was rough, clumsy, but when I pushed the notebook back to him, Eli's face lit up like I'd given him a gift. "That's you," he said, tracing the lines with his finger. "Strong, even when you feel stripped bare." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the way he looked at me made me believe, just for a moment, that he was right. We sat there, talking about art, about the city, about the things we'd both run from. Eli told me he'd grown up in a strict family in Chicago, where being openly gay wasn't an option. He'd come to New York to find himself, to live without apology, but it wasn't as easy as he'd hoped. The break room clock ticked too fast, and soon Eli had to go back to work. Before he left, he scribbled his number on a corner of the notebook page and tore it off, pressing it into my hand. "Call me," he said. "Not a request, but a challenge. Or don't. But I think you will." Then he was gone, back to the store, leaving me with a piece of paper that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I walked out into the city, the note burning a hole in my pocket. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just drifting. I had a choice to make, and it scared me to death. The city was alive that night, neon lights cutting through the dusk as I walked home to my cramped Brooklyn apartment. Eli's number sat on my nightstand, a scrap of paper that felt like a grenade with the pin half pulled. I didn't call him. Not that night, or the next. But I thought about him constantly: his voice, his sketches, the way he'd seen something in me I didn't even see in myself. Days turned into a week, and I avoided the H&M like it was haunted. Work kept me busy bussing tables at a diner in Williamsburg, where the tips were decent, but the hours left me hollow. My roommate, Jake, noticed I was quieter than usual, but I brushed him off. How do you explain that a 5-minute conversation with a stranger has turned your world upside down? I wasn't even sure what I was feeling: attraction, fear, hope, all tangled together like wires in a drawer. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. On a rainy Thursday, I pulled out my phone and texted Eli, "Hey, it's Lucas from H&M." My thumb hovered over the send button for a full minute before I pressed it. His reply came almost instantly: "Took you long enough. Meet me at Washington Square Park, 7 p.m. No question, no hesitation. Just that same quiet confidence that made my heart race. The park was crowded despite the drizzle. Street musicians playing under the arch. Students laughing in clusters. I spotted Eli on a bench, sketching in that same notebook. His hoodie damp, but his focus unbroken. "You came," he said when I sat down, not looking up from his drawing. "Wasn't sure you would." I wasn't sure either, I admitted, shoving my hands in my pockets. He closed the notebook and turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "So why did you?" he asked. I didn't have an answer, not one I could put into words. Instead, I shrugged, and he laughed, a soft, warm sound that cut through the rain. "Fair enough," he said. "Come on, let's walk." We wandered through the park, then down side streets, talking about nothing and everything. Eli told me about his art, how he'd always drawn but never thought it could be more than a hobby. I told him about dropping out of college, How my parents still thought I was figuring things out when really I was just lost. The rain stopped, and the city glowed under the streetlights, like it was putting on a show just for us. At a quiet coffee shop, we sat across from each other, steam rising from our cups. Eli leaned forward, his voice low. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tight. "All the time," I said, "like I'm wearing a mask, and I don't know how to take it off." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine, and I didn't pull away. "You don't have to wear it with me," he said. That night, I felt like I was breathing for the first time in years. We walked until midnight, the city unfolding around us. And when we parted ways at the subway, Eli hugged me quick, fierce, like he was afraid I'd disappear. "Text me tomorrow," he said, and I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Back home, I lay awake, replaying every moment. I was falling for him, and it terrified me. I'd spent so long hiding who I was, convincing myself it was safer that way. But Eli was like a key, unlocking parts of me I'd kept buried. The next day, I texted him, and we met again, then again, and again. Coffee shops turned into late-night diners, park benches into art galleries where Eli would sketch and I'd watch, mesmerized. But it wasn't all easy. My parents called, asking when I was coming home for a visit, their voices laced with expectations I couldn't meet. I dodged their questions, but the guilt gnawed at me. Eli had his own struggles as manager at H&M was cracking down, threatening to cut his hours if he didn't focus. And there was something he wasn't telling me, a shadow in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. One night, as we sat on his tiny balcony overlooking the city, Eli turned to me, his expression serious. "Lucas, if we get serious, you need to know something." His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "I'm not going anywhere, but I need you to be sure. Because this life, it's not easy. Not for people like us." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure not of him, but of myself. Could I be brave enough to live openly, to face the world as I was? I reached for his hand, and for now, that was enough. Eli's words hung in the air that night, heavy with a truth I wasn't ready to face. People like us. I knew what he meant, two guys falling for each other in a world that didn't always make room for it. But knowing and living it were two different things, and I was still teetering on the edge of both. We kept seeing each other, stealing moments between my shifts at the diner and his at H&M. Every date felt like a rebellion, a quiet middle finger to the doubts screaming in my head. Eli was fearless in a way I envied. Hold my hand in public, not defiantly but naturally, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I'd tense up, glancing around for judgmental eyes, but his grip would tighten, grounding me. "They don't matter," he'd say, and for a moment, I'd believe him. One evening, he took me to an underground art show in a warehouse in Bushwick. The place was a riot of color and sound, paintings on every wall, music pulsing, people laughing and dancing like they'd forgotten the world outside. Eli's sketches were on display, raw and vivid, each one telling a story of struggle or joy. I saw one that stopped me cold, a drawing of a guy with my eyes, my posture, standing alone in a crowd. "That's you," Eli said, appearing beside me. "The first time I saw you in the store." I couldn't speak. The drawing wasn't just might, was how Eli saw me. Vulnerable but strong, lost but searching. I turned to him, and before I could think, I kissed him, right there in the middle of the crowd. It was my first time kissing a guy in public, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. But Eli just smiled, pulling me closer, and the world didn't end. No one stared. No one cared. For once, I felt free. But freedom didn't last. A week later, I got a call from my mom. "We're coming to the city," she said, her voice bright but edged with something I couldn't place. "We want to see you." "Lucas, it's been too long." Panic clawed at me. My parents didn't know about Eli. Didn't know I was gay. I'd spent years dodging their questions, changing the subject when they asked if I was dating. How could I tell them now, when I was only just starting to understand it myself? I told Eli about the visit over dinner at a hole-in-the-wall taco place. His face stayed calm, but his eyes were sharp, searching. "You gonna tell them?" he asked, picking at his food. I stared at my plate. The words stuck in my throat. "I don't know," I said finally. "It's not that simple." Eli leaned back, his jaw tight. "It's never simple," he said. "But hiding's worse. Trust me. I've done it." He didn't push, but I could feel the distance between us growing. That night, as we walked back to his place, he was quieter than usual, his hands in his pockets instead of reaching for mine. I wanted to fix it, to tell him I'd be brave. But the fear was too big. What if my parents rejected me? What if I lost the only family I had? The day my parents arrived, I was a wreck. We met at a cafe near their hotel, and I spent the whole meal dodging their questions about my life. "You seem distracted," my dad said, his eyes narrowing. "Everything okay?" I nodded, forcing a smile. But my mom's gaze lingered, like she could see the truth I was hiding. When they asked me to join them for dinner the next night, I agreed, but my stomach churned. After they left, I went to Eli's apartment, needing to see him, to feel something solid. He opened the door, and before he could say anything, I kissed him, desperate and clumsy. "I'm scared," I admitted when we pulled apart, my voice shaking. Eli's expression softened, and he pulled me into a hug. "I know," he said, "but you don't have to do this alone." We stayed up all night, talking, laughing, sometimes just sitting in silence. Eli told me about the first time he came out, to a friend who didn't take it well. "It hurt," he said, "but it taught me who I could trust. And it made me stronger." I wanted that strength, but I didn't know how to find it. All I knew was that Eli was the one person who made me feel like I could. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't ready to tell my parents everything, but I wasn't going to hide Eli either. He deserved more than that. I deserved more. Dinner with my parents loomed like a storm cloud. I spent the day before pacing my apartment, rehearsing what I might say, each version sounding worse than the last. Eli texted me to check in, his words simple but steady. "You got this. I'm here." I clung to that, but the fear still gnawed at me, a constant reminder of how much I stood to lose. When the evening came, I met my parents at an Italian restaurant in Midtown, all polished wood and candlelight. They were in good spirits, talking about their drive from upstate, the new neighbors, the usual small talk. I nodded along, my hands sweaty under the table. Every time I opened my mouth to say something real, the words died. How do you tell the people who raised you that you're not who they think you are? Halfway through the meal, my mom set down her fork, her eyes soft but piercing. "Lucas, what's going on with you?" she asked. "You're not yourself." My dad leaned forward, his brow furrowed. I felt like I was 16 again, caught sneaking out. Except this time, there was no easy lie to tell. I took a deep breath. Eli's voice in my head, "You don't have to do this alone." "I'm seeing someone," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. My parents exchanged a glance, surprised but not alarmed. "That's great, honey," my mom said, smiling. "Who is she?" The question hit like a punch, and I froze, my heart pounding so loud I thought they'd hear it. "It's not a she," I said, my voice barely audible. "His name is Eli." The silence that followed was deafening. My mom's smile faded, and my dad's face hardened, his fork clattering against his plate. "What are you saying, Lucas?" he asked, his voice low, like he was hoping he'd misheard. I forced myself to keep going, to not back down. "I'm gay," I said, clearer this time. "And Eli's important to me. I wanted you to know." My mom's eyes filled with tears, and my dad just stared at the table, his jaw tight. We didn't raise you like this," he said finally, his voice shaking with something between anger and disbelief. My mom reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Give us a minute, Lucas," she said softly, and I nodded, standing on unsteady legs. I stepped outside, the city noise swallowing me as I fought to breathe. I called Eli, my hands trembling. "I told them," I said when he picked up, and it went about as bad as I thought. He didn't say anything for a moment. Just let me talk. Let me spill the fear and hurt and anger. "Come over," he said when I was done. "You shouldn't be alone right now." I didn't argue. Eli's apartment was a mess of art supplies and half-finished sketches, but it felt like a sanctuary. He didn't ask me to talk, just handed me a beer and sat beside me on the couch, his shoulder brushing mine. "You did something huge tonight," he said after a while, "even if it doesn't feel like it right now." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "They hate me," I said. Eli took my hand, his grip firm. "They don't hate you. They're just scared. Give them time." I wanted to believe him, but the look on my dad's face was burned into my mind. We stayed there, talking until the city outside went quiet. And when I fell asleep on his couch, Eli draped a blanket over me. For the first time that night, I felt safe. The next morning, I woke to a text from my mom. "We need to talk. Can we meet?" My stomach dropped, but I agreed. Eli came with me, not to the meeting, but to wait nearby, his presence a quiet strength. At the cafe, my parents looked tired, like they hadn't slept either. My mom spoke first, her voice shaky. "We were shocked, Lucas. We didn't see this coming. But we love you. We just need time to understand." My dad was quieter, but he nodded. "I don't get it," he said, "but I don't want to lose you." It wasn't acceptance. Not fully, but it was a start. I left the cafe feeling lighter, like I'd shed a weight I'd carried for years. Eli was waiting outside, and when I told him what happened, he pulled me into a hug, right there on the sidewalk. "Told you," he whispered, and I laughed, the sound surprising me. We were far from perfect, but we were moving forward, together. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of hope and tension. My parents and I texted sporadically, their messages careful but kind, like they were testing the waters. I didn't push, grateful for any connection at all. With Eli, though, things were different, vibrant, alive. We spent every free moment together, exploring the city, sharing pieces of ourselves we'd kept hidden for too long. One night, Eli took me to a rooftop party in Queens, thrown by some of his artist friends. The skyline sparkled below us, and the air was thick with laughter and cigarette smoke. Eli was in his element, joking with friends, his arms slung casually around my shoulders. I felt like I belonged, not just to him, but to this world he'd opened up for me. Someone handed me a drink, and as I sipped it, Eli leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. "You're smiling more these days," he said. I hadn't noticed, but he was right. But not everything was easy. Eli's job at H&M was getting Shea Kiri's manager had it out for him, piling on extra shifts and nitpicking his work. "He knows," Eli told me one night, his voice bitter. "About me. About us." He saw us together outside the store. I felt a surge of anger, but also fear. Eli was out and unapologetic, but I was still learning how to navigate that world. The idea of someone targeting him for it made my blood boil. "Let's quit," I said impulsively, half joking. "Both of us. Start over somewhere new." Eli laughed, but there was a spark in his eyes, like he was actually considering it. "You'd run away with me?" he asked, teasing but serious. I nodded, surprising myself. "Yeah, I would." The idea took root, growing with every late-night conversation. We started dreaming up plans moving to a smaller city, maybe Portland or Austin, where Eli could focus on his art and I could figure out what I wanted to do with my life. It was a fantasy, but it felt real, like something we could actually build together. Then came the night that changed everything. We were at Eli's place, sketching together on his tiny kitchen table, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. "What's wrong?" I asked, but he just shook his head, standing up to pace. "It's my brother," he said finally. "He's in trouble. Back in Chicago." He didn't go into details, but I could see the weight of it, the way it pulled him back to a past he'd tried to leave behind. "I have to go," he said, his voice hollow. "Just for a few days. Help him sort it out." I nodded, but my chest tightened. I'd gotten so used to having Eli around, to leaning on him. "Want me to come with you?" I asked, but he shook his head. "This is something I need to do alone." He kissed me, soft and lingering, before grabbing his bag. "I'll be back soon," he promised. "Don't disappear on me." He left that night, and the city felt emptier without him. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the ache of his absence. We texted, but his replies were short, distracted. I told myself it was just the stress of whatever was happening with his brother. But doubt crept in. What if he didn't come back? What if this was all too much? Too fast? A week later, he called. "I'm coming back tomorrow," he said, his voice tired but warm. "But there's something I need to tell you." My heart sank. "What?" I asked, bracing myself. He hesitated, then said, "My brother, he's sick. Really sick. I might need to stay in Chicago longer than I thought. Maybe for good." The words hit like a freight train. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened as he explained his brother had been diagnosed with cancer, and their parents weren't around to help. Eli was all he had. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice breaking. "But I don't know how to do this." I spent that night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Eli had been my anchor, the one person who made me feel like I could be myself. But now he was slipping away, and I had to decide stay in my safe, small life, or take a risk for something bigger. Eli's return was bittersweet. He stepped off the train at Penn Station, his eyes tired but lighting up when he saw me. We hugged, longer than usual, and I felt the weight he was carrying. Over coffee, he told me about his brother, Sam, who was only 19 and facing chemo. "He's scared," Eli said, staring into his cup. "And I'm all he's got right now." I reached for his hand, wishing I could take some of that burden away. We spent the day together, walking through Central Park, the autumn leaves crunching under our feet. Neither of us mentioned Chicago, but it hung between us, an unspoken question. That night, at my place, Eli was quieter than usual, his sketches more frantic, like he was trying to draw his way out of the chaos in his head. "What are you going to do?" I finally asked, unable to stand the silence. He set down his pencil, his eyes meeting mine. "I don't know," he said. "I want to stay here, with you. But Sam needs me, and I can't just abandon him." I nodded, my throat tight. I wanted to beg him to stay, to tell him we could figure it out. But I knew it wasn't that simple. Family wasn't something you could walk away from, not when it mattered. The next few days were a blur of stolen moments. We went to another art show, ate cheap pizza on a stoop, kissed under a streetlight like we were the only two people in the world. But every moment felt fragile, like it could be our last. I started looking at jobs in Chicago, just to see what was out there. The idea of leaving New York, my home, terrified me. But the thought of losing Eli was worse. One night, as we lay in bed, Eli turned to me, his voice soft. "If I go, would you come with me?" It was the question I'd been dreading and hoping for. I thought about my parents, still grappling with my coming out, my job, my life here. But then I looked at Eli, his eyes full of hope and fear, and I knew my answer. "Yeah," I said. "I would." It wasn't a promise. Not yet. But it was enough to keep us going. We started making plans, practical ones this time, not just dreams. Eli looked into art schools in Chicago, and I applied for restaurant jobs. My resume a patchwork of short-term gigs. My parents called, and I told them about Eli's situation, about the possibility of moving. To my surprise, my mom didn't argue. "If he's good to you," she said, "then you do what you need to do." My dad was still quiet, but he didn't object, and that felt like progress. But life doesn't wait for plans to solidify. A week later, Eli got a call from Sam's doctor. The cancer was more aggressive than they'd thought, and Sam needed him now. "I have to go," Eli said, his voice breaking. I nodded, tears in my eyes. "I'll come as soon as I can," I said. "Just don't give up on us." He kissed me, fierce and desperate, and then he was gone again, this time with no clear return date. I went back to work, to my routine, but it felt hollow without him. I kept his notebook, the one we'd sketched in together, and added my own drawings, small, hopeful things, like the life we might build. Days turned into weeks, and Eli's texts became less frequent, each one laced with exhaustion. I sent him packages, sketches, snacks, a scarf I'd bought at H&M to make him laugh. He called when he could, his voice a lifeline across the miles. "Sam's fighting," he'd say, and I could hear the pride and pain in his words. "And I'm fighting for us." I started saving money, researching apartments in Chicago. My parents came around more, my mom even asking about Eli, how he was holding up. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I felt like I was finally living my own life, not someone else's. Then, one night, Eli called. His voice different, lighter. Almost hopeful. "Sam's in remission," he said, and I could hear the tears in his voice. "It's not over, but it's good news." I laughed, relief flooding through me. And he added, "I'm coming back to New York. For you." Eli's train was late, and I stood at Penn Station, my heart a tangle of nerves and excitement. When he finally stepped onto the platform, I ran to him, wrapping him in a hug that felt like coming home. He was thinner, his eyes shadowed, but his smile was the same, warm and real. "Missed you," he whispered, and I felt the truth of it in my bones. We didn't go back to my place or his. Instead, we walked to the H&M on Fifth Avenue, the place where it all started. It was late, the store nearly empty, but Eli still had a key from his old job. We slipped into the fitting room at the end of the hall, the same one where he'd locked the door all those months ago. "Full circle," he said, laughing softly as he leaned against the mirror. We talked for hours, sitting on the floor, the fluorescent lights buzzing above us. Eli told me about Chicago, about Sam's recovery, about the long nights in the hospital when he'd thought he might lose everything. "But I kept thinking about you," he said, taking my hand. "You were what got me through." I told him about my own journey, the job applications, the talks with my parents, the way I'd started sketching again, filling his notebook with pieces of our story. "I'm not hiding anymore," I said, and it felt like a vow, to him and to myself. Eli's eyes shone, and he kissed me, slow and deliberate, like he was sealing that vow. We didn't have all the answers. Eli was still figuring out how to balance his life in New York with his family in Chicago. I was still figuring out what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be. But we had each other, and that was enough. The next day, we went to an art supply store, buying paints and canvases, planning a project together. It wasn't just about art, it was about building something, a life that was ours. Months later, we moved into a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, the walls covered in our sketches. My parents visited, awkward at first but trying, their hugs a little tighter each time. Sam came too, his laugh echoing through the place, and I saw Eli's pride in his brother's strength. We weren't perfect, but we were real. One evening, as we sat on our fire escape, the city humming below, Eli pulled out his notebook, now worn and full. He flipped to a new page and handed me a pencil. "Draw us," he said. I dyed a sketch of two figures, hands entwined, standing against a city skyline. It wasn't flawless, but it was honest, like us. Looking back, I think about that day in the fitting room, when Eli locked the door and saw me for who I was. He didn't just change my life, he gave me the courage to live it. And every day since, we've been unlocking new doors together. One sketch, one kiss, one moment at a time.